Esquire, representing his grandfather, Lieutenant Marco Young.
Just say a few words and then ask my mother to come forward to accept the award on behalf of my family. In May 1942, my grandfather, Willis Marco Young, volunteered to fly in an anti-submarine patrol here in Parksley. Marco was 46 years old at the time, and he was ineligible for military service, but that didn't deter him from contributing to the war effort as a volunteer. He left his wife and his 8-year-old daughter in Louisiana, turned a successful interstate trucking company over to his brother, and flew to Parksley in the early days of World War II. Like all the pilots here, my grandfather used his own plane for his patrols. He flew a Beechcraft 17 Staggerwing. One writer has said that the Staggerwing was the Learjet of its era, due to its speed, sophistication, and comfort. In 2014, Flying Magazine said the Staggerwing was the most beautiful plane in aviation history. My grandfather and his brother owned no less than 6 Staggerwings between 37 and 49. His love for the Staggerwing was exemplified by an interview he gave to Flying Magazine in 1977. In that interview, he explained that his days as a pilot ended about 1949, which was the same year that the Staggerwing production ended. He told the magazine that I figured that the Beechcraft biplane was the best airplane that a person could fly. And when they quit making them, I was just ready to quit flying. My grandfather did all his own maintenance on his plane. I'm told the mechanics here preferred him to do so, as they were unfamiliar with the Staggerwing and the somewhat unorthodox way that had been devised by my grandfather to make it airworthy. Eventually, the mechanics at Parksley began to strap 250-pound bombs under each of the larger planes so that a pilot could bomb a German U-boat if he ever saw one. To my knowledge, Marco never had the opportunity to test those aerial bombing skills. He logged many hours of flight time during his service here at Parksley, including ILS flights when weather conditions prevented other pilots from completing their patrols. His instrument flying skills were definitely in demand. In a history of the base that was written after the war by Major Burnham said that Marco was a grand pilot. He couldn't hear too well, and he couldn't see too well, but he had an instrument rating, and he was always anxious to try his luck against instrument weather. We had a hard time holding him on the ground whenever the weather got bad. For his efforts, Marco and several other pilots were awarded the Air Medal for Meritorious Achievement by the Air Force in 1948. Those awards were not announced publicly because the federal government didn't want to admit that they were arming civilian aircraft during the early days of World War II. My grandfather was hardly the ideal candidate for this type of service. He was an accomplished pilot, but he was a middle-aged man, partially blind in one eye. He knew the dangers of flying in this era. As a young pilot, he survived a plane crash in which 2 passengers were killed. He lost his younger brother Ted in a plane crash in an air show. My grandfather witnessed that crash, and he pulled Ted's body out of the plane. I mention these details to give you some insight into the character of the men who chose to serve here at Parksley. Their heroism is not illustrated solely by the many missions that they flew. It's also evidenced by their individual decisions to set aside careers, personal lives, and their plans for the future in order to participate in the Civil Air Patrol. On behalf of my mother and the rest of our family, thank you for coming today.